nice things about it. We're supposed to do a stint over at the law school with everybody.
Oh, you should. It's beautiful.
And we have a couple of our really first-rate people in our project who did their law school with it.
Yeah. The law school is absolutely beautiful. It's on the top of the hill by the...
Yes, there. Right.
Oh my gosh. And if you're a visiting professor, they have a beach house, like if it's a 2-week thing, that's where just stays in. There's like a donor beach house. Oh, it's great. But like the views from the library are stunning. So if they ever ask you to do like a special 2-week summer course, I would take it.
Yeah, I might be very tempted, but we're supposed to do some couple of lectures over there and have seminars, and so it's. And we have Brittany Lane, who came out of there.
Yeah, I played water polo with her.
Huh?
I played water polo with her.
When she was in law school?
Yeah, when I was a freshman, she played on our club water polo team.
But then she went to Harvard, then went to Pepperdine, because my went to Christian law school.
Yeah.
And then
she was intense because she played water polo for Harvard, and then she came on our team for our club team, and she was absolutely the best person.
now she's going to Kirkford Class Thomas.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I had class with Justice Thomas this last semester.
And we were talking to him about it. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, he's absolutely fantastic.
He's a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And he's become a great teacher.
Yes, he is a fantastic teacher, and just the stories he tells about like where he came from and like his life, it's like story time with Justice Thomas in the class is absolutely great. Josiah was actually in that class as well.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Did the conservatives have a better chance of getting in, or simply random?
It was a straight lottery. So,
wow, you're lucky. You got it.
It was like 20 students, so it was really great.
Oh, that's great. That's racial preferences and so on. Well, when I grew up, there was a 2-foot of water fountains, nice cool water for the whites and colored. I don't see how you solve that by simply switching the labels on.
Yeah. Total common sense.
Yeah, that's so.
Do you know Hadley?
Both sit back down and do questions.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, and we can go until about 1:20. Is that what you're telling me?
I mean, like we don't have we have to room till like 1:30, I think, or so. So, like we try to.
Right, but the kids will be needing to leave before that. That's a point. Yeah. So that's usually the custom at Federal Society. You shut it down. You start to get up and leave. Yeah. Okay, we're done.
We usually sometimes we have it depends on the size.
Hi, Natalie. How are you?
Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Greg Max. I'm the faculty advisor for the Federal
How do
Society.
you do, Greg? What is it?
Mags.
Greg Maggs. Nice to meet you. Jennifer Roback.
Thank you for coming.
Well, you're very welcome. You're very welcome.
You are already in very capable hands, so I won't interrupt you
I
further.
sense that all is well. Everything's good. So we've already done. Yeah. Thank you for coming. What area of law do you teach?
I just constitutional law.
Oh, okay.
And secure paper.
And a bunch of other courses too.
I always get when I was in his class for secure paper and commercial transactions.
For what?
Secure transactions.
Yeah, I always, that's what I was going to say. Every time I tried to say which one was which thing, I always said it backwards.
Secure transactions is commercial paper.
There you go.
Yeah, you have to start someplace if you want to teach constitutional law. You can't just come in and say, I want to teach constitutional law. So it took me 10 years before I got into teaching constitutional law.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
But then we had like a bunch of people on leave or absence. I'll teach it. Once I got it.
Everyone loves his constitutional law class. I was not lucky enough to take it, but we did use his book that he co-wrote with Professor Smith, so that's a good one. Also, he co-teaches the class of Justice Thomas in the fall that I was lucky enough to be in, which is fantastic.
It's really nice.
But yeah.
Really nice.
But you should know Professor Bags because he's awesome, so you guys can talk.
All right. Well, I am not now, nor have I ever been a lawyer. So, in economics graduate school, we take courses in money, and labor. Those are the classes we take.
We learned about checks, so.
Learn about checks.
The problem with economics is, isn't it like now all math? My son
A lot of it
took a couple of economics courses in college. I guess he's got like a minor, but it's like, I look at his books and it's all math.
Yeah.
It's all
Except
math.
for a few places like George Mason and places like that kind of still teach it as a branch of moral philosophy.
Yeah.
But it's a technocratic discipline now. It's
I took what econ class in college and got an A, so I was like, we're good.
But I was drawn to George Mason. I mean, I taught at Mason for 11 years, and the reason I was drawn to it was because it emphasized the more humanistic side of the discipline, And so the law and econ guys are not all math guys. The economic history guys are not all math guys.
I don't object to math. It's just I can't really get into like he would show me his books. It was like.
What is this for? What is this for?
Yeah, one of my majors, I had a double major, but it's applied math. And so I'm actually, I can do calculus and things like that, but it's like, how does this relate to economics? It was like, so.
Right. Well, everyone in law school has a reversion to math.
I've made that joke from time to time at Blackstone.
It's a good joke.
It is a good joke.
Keep making it. You can keep making it.
I know you guys are all math phobic, okay? That's why you're in here.
It was so bad in my contract class one other year. We were doing, I don't remember what we were doing. We were trying to figure out like what half or 75% of it 100,000 was. And everyone was like, oh. I'm like, guys. And everyone was like, subtract 25,000 from 100,000. And she's like, I'll do round numbers. I'm like, oh my god. I think it was more like we didn't want to do it than we couldn't do it. It was just like, don't write. I'm trying to understand all of this contract stuff.
Yeah.
Let's not throw some
I'll let you get ready.
Yeah, well, nice meeting you.
Yeah, he was actually an MD in the law school. And I think his father was the dean of the school, and he took for the system. And when he judged the world.
Oh, wow.
But he's pretty much kind of a rock star.
I guess so. Oh, I'm honored.
You gotta check and see how everything's going.
I'm going to speak from over there.
Okay,
But
I'll do the same thing. Okay.
to come if you wanted to come.
Yeah, I came in with once.
I saw that. Yeah. Oh, are you? Oh, anyway.
No, we came to the meeting, but anyway, yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, you're welcome. As far as I'm concerned, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to this, and hopefully, you didn't see my RSVP on there. I guess you didn't see the list.
No, I don't see that. No.
But I saw it, and I thought,
Well, thank you very much. I think Doug is going to come to my thing at Catholic U on Friday. I'm going to be at Catholic U on Friday.
oh, really?
Yeah, John Paul II Institute. She would really pick me out, and I think Doug's going to be there.
Okay.
Oh, Doug. I haven't seen him in a long. He doesn't call me. We had a little chat about it. Remember?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So are you in touch?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
he kind of disappeared for a while,
Oh, yeah.
and I kind of reached out to him, and he's kind of back. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
Very clear on what we're doing.
Huh? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'll go up there and welcome everyone, and introduce the Federal Society, and then introduce you to come up. You'll introduce Professor Morse, and
Okay.
then she'll speak, and then you'll give
Yeah.
kind of a commentary, and then you'll listen.
Oh, I wasn't going to give a commentary, but I'll throw in something. But I wanted to say some. I'll take about 2 minutes to say something about the project, about what connects us to this talk.
Okay, but feel free to.
All right. Okay. Sure. Oh, Milt. Oh, sweet of you to come. How lovely to come. Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event, The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims. The Federalist Society is happy to co-host this event with the James Wilson Institute. The Federalist Society is a nonpartisan, conservative, and libertarian organization dedicated to fostering balance and open debate about the fundamental principles of freedom, federalism, and judicial restraint. The Federalist Society seeks to educate the legal community through its programs and publications about how limited constitutional government, based on the rule of law, can have a positive effect on law and public policy. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Hadley Arcus of the James Wilson Institute.
Okay, thanks, Natalie, and thanks, Natalie and George, for organizing this thing. Thank Professor Matthews for coming in, and I see Milt Grenfell, distinguished architect, and Austin Roos, and Paul Hyden and Zimmer. Thank you all for carving out the time in midday to come along to this. I'm Hadley Arcus, a refugee from Amherst College, professor emeritus, now phasing into this new project on the James Wilson Institute on Natural Rights in the American Founding. We're quite pleased here to join with our friends at the Federal Society, especially with this chapter at the law school GW, which is a certain nostalgic hold for me that because my late wife was for years the director of academic publications. She worked with Greg and a number of other people here, so I've heard about the ups and downs of this place over the years, and I've known distinguished alumni of this place, as with Mike Carvin, who's become one of our most important, preeminent advocates before the Supreme Court. We had jointly sponsored last year a session with Mike Carvin in the aftermath of the Burwell case under How Did It Go. It was one of the very best, most candid discussions we've had. I was asked to explain something about this new entity of ours, James Wilson Institute. We named it after one of the premier minds of the American founding, and that has not received the celebration he's deserved. James Wilson, Philadelphia, a Scottish emigre, quite an important voice as the Constitutional Convention and the ratifying convention in Pennsylvania, a member of the first Supreme Court, and the author of some elegant lectures on law delivered at the University of Pennsylvania, lectures that have threaded through my own work. But we come together today to bring one of the most engaging presentations we could offer at any time with a dear friend of many years, Jen Roback Morse, an accomplished economist, a compelling speaker, and a wise, wise woman. I first saw Jennifer years ago at Amherst, in her economist mode, as a libertarian and economist pointing up the strengths of the free market. And she was showing how the earliest legislation on Jim Crow was really a form of mandating segregation, was a kind of response of political management to a market that was otherwise working to draw black labor from the South to better paying jobs and conditions in the North. Well, after Jennifer was married, and that libertarian sense of people buoyantly free seemed to give way to an understanding of so many obligations we're obliged to accept, even when we didn't choose our conditions, even though we didn't choose those parents we have, or those children we didn't exactly order. I used to call them gifts without warranties. Jennifer, her husband, had adopted, and then she became pregnant. So they had an adopted child, natural child. And they also, in their large nature, began to take in foster children in San Diego and took in as many as 8 over time. She came to write and lecture on these matters in talk on the family, in talks and books of real insight. The titles would suggest the angle and the wit at work here. Love and Economics, It Takes a Family to Raise a Village. The play on Hillary Clinton, we have a copy of it there. But her concerns came closer to ours about the moral and political dimensions of the problem, with pamphlets with these titles: The Government's Duty to Marriage, or The Socialist Attack on the Family. Now, in that vein, I was asked if I would say just a bit more to explain the connection between this talk and the concerns of this James Wilson Institute. The purpose of this project of ours, we said, has been to restore to a new generation of lawyers those furnishings of mind of those remarkable men like James Wilson, Alexander Hamilton, John Marshall, who helped to establish this regime and frame this Constitution. And James Wilson had famously said that we didn't bring forth this Constitution for the sake of inventing new rights, but rather to secure and enlarge those rights we already had by nature. The founders began with a common sense understanding of certain rights grounded in nature, in that nature that will separate human things from subhuman things. And the sense was that those rights would remain the same in all places where that nature remained the same. So even in this age of animal rights, we still don't think it's sensible to sign labor contracts with our horses or cows, or seek the informed consent of our household pets before we authorize surgery on them. But we continue to think that those beings who can give and understand reasons over matters of right and wrong deserve to be ruled with a rendering of reasons in a regime that elicits their consent. So as Lincoln understood, whether we're talking about this country, another culture, this year or another year, it would always be wrong for some human beings to rule others in the way that human beings are compelled to rule horses and cows. And remember, Jefferson said in that famous letter, anyone who denies that has to assume that the mass of mankind were born with saddles on their backs, and the privileged few were born with spurs on, ready to ride them. In those opening lines of the Politics, Aristotle made the critical point, whose import seems strangely overlooked these days, that human beings are alone suited by nature for political life, that is, the life marked by the presence of law, the capacity to make decisions that are binding on everyone who comes within the territory. That law springs from the nature of only one kind of creature could understand what it means to bear an obligation to a commitment, a contract, a promise that no longer accords with his interests or his inclinations. And yet this critical point is curiously overlooked by many friends of ours who fall into a mistake when they say things like this, that marriage is pre-political. Pre-political. They seem to have in mind that marriage, the sexual engagement, exists quite apart from government. And they seem to, something that existed in nature before the advent of government, but what they seem to rule out is the notion that law itself is part of that nature, as something that arises distinctly from human nature. There's a curious line in Aristotle in the Politics where he said that the polis, the political order, is prior to the family. And well, look, this urbane man knew that people were quite capable of having sex, even in those moments when governments broke down, and were capable of having sex before governments broke down. but the notion of a family, of an institution that envelops with a framework of lawfulness and commitment the relations of begetting and nurturing children, that imparts the sense to the child that your parents have foregone their freedom to quit you as they've foregone their freedom to quit one another as it suits their convenience. That is the kind of commitment that is brought distinctly by law. By law. Now, what we've been seeing of late is the wreckage that's come about when this other part of nature has been sort of gradually and then swiftly detached from the notion of sex and marriage. We've seen it in the casualties of marriages coming apart, and we've put more critically in the offspring of what we've got now, more by men who don't take the responsibility of the children they've begotten. What are the lines from Isaiah? Fear not, I've redeemed thee, I've called thee by thy name, thou art mine. I'm giving you my name, I'm taking responsibility. Well, Jennifer Morse founded the Ruth Institute, an interfaith organization, as we say, devoted to healing the victims and survivors of the sexual revolution. And I say no one, my experience, no one has spoken on this matter with more acuity and feeling than Jennifer. So would you join me in welcoming her to this podium?
Thank you, Hadley, and thank you, everybody, for being here. The food smells good, doesn't it? Yeah. Yes, so I'm very happy to be here, and I'm going to step back from some of the things that Dr. Arcus talked about. I'm not going to be talking about the Founding Fathers, even though this is a Federal Society event, a James Wilson event. I'm going to be talking about our contemporary situation. Particularly, I'll be talking about the sexual revolution and its victims. Now, I'd like to begin by just giving you a brief overview of the short version of my life, not because my life is so interesting, but because I think it bears on some of the things that I'm going to be talking about, and I think it will help illustrate some of the themes that I have in my mind. Just the other day, I live now in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and just the other day I was in the supermarket in this small town in Louisiana, and I heard on the Muzak this Olivia Newton-John song called Torn Between Two Lovers. I don't know if you've ever heard this song. Anybody ever heard this song? Okay. Some of you are young enough to have dodged this. This is some of the stuff that we had to listen to in the 70s. You know, it's like it's amazing anybody survived the 70s. Anyway, so I'm sitting here hearing this song, and I'm kind of humming along. It's a catchy little tune. And I looked back on my life when this song came out, and I realized that I had made certain decisions in my life based on believing that song. And I knew other people who have done similar kinds of things. The theme of the song is that you can have sex with more than one person at a time, and it's no big deal. Nothing particularly consequential will happen if you do that. It's no big deal. And as I look back on my own life, the people that I knew in my life, I cannot think of a single person for whom that actually worked. When I look back at the people who tried to do that, we all thought this was some, great, glorious, glamorous thing we were doing. We were edgy and, transgressive and all that type of stuff. I guess you guys are still into those kind of words. We were into that, too, in the 70s. But anyway, I can't think of a single person for whom it worked. I can think of multiple divorces. I can think of at least one abortion. I can think of one family where the non-married partner became pregnant and chose to have the child, which then, of course, precipitated divorce. And I can even think of a suicide that took place as a result of this. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that people are now talking once again about open marriage as though it's a brand new idea. Nobody's ever thought of it before. And I just want to report from the front of the 1970s that it has been tried, and it really doesn't work, okay? And you guys who are hearing these things again, I just, evidence over here, we have I'm an economist. He forgot to mention I'm an economist. In economics, we don't do highfalutin philosophy stuff, and I'm a little bit of a knuckle dragger in this regard. I can't quote the Federalist Papers and Aristotle what I like to look at is the data, And the experience, the lived human experience. In economics, we kind of start from the idea that there's a real world out there, that there is some nature, and if you conform yourself to nature, you're going to have a pretty good life. And if you bang your head up against nature, pretty soon nature's going to harm you. You know, and nobody has to be mean about it. It's just kind of what's going to happen. So just reporting on Olivia Newton-John and her song there, it's part of the muzak of our culture. It has never been repudiated because the evidence has never been made clear to people. Second thing that I can tell you about is that I did myself have an abortion back in the day. And again, this is something we were told was no big deal, that it was your right, it was your choice, and there's no discernible downside to it, okay? And so it was surprising to me when a few months after the abortion, I began waking up in the middle of the night with night terrors. It was surprising to me when around the anniversary of the time that the baby would have been born, when the baby would have been born, that I was very upset, that I was distressed. And that every year around that time, for quite a few years, every year I had those kind of anniversary anxieties. And I went to many therapists about different kinds of things, and not a single one was willing to say that there might be some connection between the abortion and what I was feeling. It was only when I went back to the practice of the Catholic faith and went to confession, talked to a priest, the priest, you know, was not surprised that some women experience anxiety and upset and distress over having an abortion. So that's the second thing that I would like to report. It's still not considered politically correct to mention that some women do indeed experience negative psychological results from their abortions. And I think after you've had a medical procedure available legally for 40 years, you should have some kind of protocol to tell people that if you have a history of depression, this might not be the best solution to your problem. And yet we don't have that kind of informed consent type of protocol, which we have with lots and lots of ordinary medical procedures. And then finally, on a more happy note, the thing which really changed my life completely from being a free market economist, as Hadley described, to doing the work that I do now, is motherhood. And I'm going to be giving a talk at Catholic University of America on Friday, and I'll talk more about this theme at that time. But for now, what I want to tell you about is that my idea about motherhood was that I would get tenure at George Mason. I taught at Mason for about 10 years out there, okay? And so my idea was that I was going to get tenure at Mason, and then I would have my baby in the spring, right at the end of the semester, and then I would take care of the baby during the summer, and then I would go right back to work in September, and everything would be great. I would never miss a class. I would never miss a day of work. That's what all my colleagues did back then, and I think to some extent a lot of women do still do that sort of thing. Well, imagine my surprise when the baby did not arrive during the month that I had set aside for it. And my husband and I were confronted with a 4.5-year crisis of infertility, which really was a crisis. It's a miserable experience, infertility. Anybody who's been through it will tell you. And for me, that was the event that precipitated my going back to the practice of the Catholic faith, because it was the first event in my adult life where I couldn't get what I wanted by trying harder and working harder and obeying the rules and being the smartest person in the room and all that sort of thing that we think makes us entitled, you know. So anyway, we resolved our fertility crisis in 1991. This is how we get into the 90s now. We resolved our infertility crisis in 1991 by agreeing to adopt a child from a Romanian orphanage. And in January of 1991, we got a phone call from an adoption agency saying, we have a little boy for you. By the time you get him, he'll be 2.5 years old. He's described as being in good health. We know his name and his birthday, and that's all we know about him. What do you say? And we said, sure, why not? When you've been infertile for 4 years, you don't really believe a baby's ever going to show up, so it's kind of cheap to say, sure, whatever, you know. So 10 days later, I went to the doctor with a head cold and found out that I was pregnant. So we had 2 children in 6 months' time, which is a record even for a Catholic. So that's how I knew I was back in the faith, you know what I mean? This kind of Planned Parenthood in reverse sort of a thing. Anyway, I cannot overstate the impact that those 2 children had on my life. And by the way, they're now in their 20s, and they will be at the talk on on Friday at CUA, as it happened. And they both turned out okay. So in spite of anything I'm about to say, know that they're fine. Okay. But our family was in the first batch of people to get children from Eastern European orphanages. And if this is something that you follow, you may know that a lot of those children have very serious problems. And in 1991, there was kind of a cluster of us here in the greater Washington area, and we knew each other. We hung out together, and we were trying to, compare notes and figure out just what to do for these kids. And we figured out they all had the same set of problems. They all had great delays in their ability to be social. They wouldn't make eye contact with you. They couldn't speak. Our boy didn't even recognize his own name at the age of 2.5. That is not normal. Now, of course, being an economics professor, I had no idea that was not normal. And so our pediatrician had to smack us and, get us off to the speech therapist and all that kind of thing. But picture this. Here we are, an economist, and my husband's an engineer, if possible, even less prepared for what we were dealing with than I as an economist was. And so we're a pair of nerds, basically. And so we have a little boy who's been severely neglected, profoundly neglected child, and then a little girl who came into our home in the usual way at birth, And we see, of course, naturally being a pair of nerds, we see a controlled experiment. And the experiment is, what difference does it make whether you have a mother and a father in your life? What difference does it make whether you have a mother and a father in your life? Whether you're cared for, whether you're cared for by your own parents. And so all kinds of ideological stuff that I had accumulated from the culture and also from being a free market economist, I had to just let go of all of that because of the pressing need to address the issues that my little boy was facing. And so that meant I ended up quitting my job and, all kinds of things that I would have thought were unthinkable. My friends told me I was a countercultural radical to give up a tenured position to stay home with kids, But surprisingly, my brain did not turn to mush at any time. Some of you may turn out to disagree with me, but I do still have some neurons flying here, So anyway, motherhood was actually one of the coolest things ever. But it helped me to see that there's something about the human condition that we have been overlooking. Certainly, as economists, the first book that I ever wrote was called Love and Economics. We do have one copy of it here. And I was trying to tell my economist colleagues that we were mistaken in acting as if the family was just one more example of the laissez-faire free market at work, where everybody can do anything they want. Where if the adults just agree on things and we make little contracts among ourselves, somehow this will all work out by an invisible hand and the kids will be just fine. Well, actually, no. The kids have some genuine needs that are pretty much hardwired by nature. They have a developmental timetable, and we neglect it at our peril and theirs. And so I was trying to convince my fellow economists that we needed to take these issues with more seriousness and look at the just look more carefully at the kinds of public policies that were being put into place even back then in 2001 that were hampering the ability of people to get married and stay married and for people to stay in communication and connection with their own children. So all of that led me to eventually, as my kids got older, and we did foster care for a few years, as Hadley mentioned, and as the kids got older, I decided to start the Ruth Institute so that I could talk more about these issues in a systematic way. And over time, my thinking has developed about these things. But I must say, I'm still proud of Love and Economics. I think it has held up very well and stood the test of time. The basic theme, I think, is still quite sound. And for those of you who are just beginning your family lives, I will tell you that new mothers find this book very affirming because it helps them to see the importance and the value of what they're doing with their children, and they don't feel like, I'm wasting my life by rocking this baby. No, that's not true. You're giving life by doing that. Okay, so as my thought has developed, I've come to the conclusion, and these are some of the principles that I have organized the Institute, the Ruth Institute, around. The Ruth Institute has a dream that every child be welcomed into a loving home with a married mother and father, so that Every child can have a relationship with his or her own parents unless some unavoidable tragedy prevents it. Of course, in the case of our little boy, it was an unavoidable tragedy that led him to be placed in an orphanage. And the best thing for him would have been if none of that had ever happened to him and he could have stayed with his own mom and dad. That would have been the best thing for him. So, so that every child can have a relationship with his or her own parents in the absence of some unavoidable tragedy, and so that every adult, without exception, can know his or her cultural heritage and genetic identity. When these rights are violated, these rights of children, we refer to this at the Ruth Institute. We call this a structural injustice to the child. And we use that term structural injustice to indicate that it's not a problem of the parents being inadequate or the parents not being good parents or anything like that. We want to distinguish bad parenting skills from the situation where there's something structurally missing or disruptive within the family. Very often, and this is what the data show us, very often even the best parenting skills cannot overcome the problems that arise due to the structure of the family. So, and we also have developed this as our goal. The goal of the Ruth Institute is to create a lasting and Christ-like social movement to end the agony and injustice of family breakdown. And I'm well aware that I'm in a secular environment, and not everybody would agree with that, but I'll just say for the record, if it's not Christ-like, I'm not interested in it. And if it's not Christ-like, it's not going to last anyhow. So that's why I express this goal in this particular way. So the sexual revolution has been with us for some time. This is my latest book called The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims. It has this picture of Marilyn Monroe on the cover. This book is a collection of essays that I've written over the years on these themes. And we like to put Marilyn Monroe on the cover of a book like this and on the cover of your poster that you all distributed. Marilyn Monroe, I think, is a great symbol of the sexual revolution and its victims, because she is a symbol of glamour and beauty and fun and excitement, and people still wear T-shirts with her images on them or carry tote bags with her image on it. But we never talk about the fact that she, according to her biographer, had 12 abortions in her life. Can you imagine what her life must have been like to lead to that? She died at an early age from an overdose of pills, and we still don't know why, whether it was suicide, whether it was whether she was murdered, whether it was an accident. We still don't know why, but we do know that she had this very tragic end to her life. And all of that is airbrushed away. See, all of that is airbrushed out of the picture, and we're left with this image of beauty and glamour, which is not the whole story. Okay, so that's why we want to use this as kind of an icon of the sexual revolution and its victims. So the sexual revolution promised us equality, freedom, and fun. But I would say to you that it's proved to be inhuman. Allow me to illustrate with the story of a little girl whom I will call Elise. Elise is 6 years old and lives with her grandmother, who is a friend of mine. Elise's mother never married, but has 2 children with different men, and Elise is the elder child. Elise and her family are examples of what we now call an alternative family form. What we mean to say when we say this is that having children outside of a lifelong marriage between a man and a woman is not particularly consequential. Not for the children, not for the people who do it, not for society. It's just another lifestyle that we shouldn't judge. Demographers describe Elise's family with the term multi-partner fertility. They came up with this term multi-partner fertility because they discovered that when a woman has a child out of wedlock, the odds are very good that her next child will also be out of wedlock and with a different man. And so the demographers will tell you that children like Elise are at risk for a whole host of problems and unpleasant outcomes. And by these standards, the things that one commonly sees in the literature, this little girl, Elise, is in pretty good shape. She lives with her grandmother. She's not in foster care. She's never been abused by her mother's boyfriends, as far as I know. And she's doing okay in school. But let me tell you just this one fact about Elise. Her family gets together for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and her mother comes over to her house, which she shares with her grandma. Her mother comes over with her new boyfriend and the new baby that they had together. After every one of these family get-togethers, Elise acts out with angry and unmanageable behavior. She typically wets her bed every day for a week. Those family gatherings are reminders that her mother doesn't want her. Every holiday stirs up the feeling that her mother doesn't love her. If she was old enough to put it into words, she might tell you that she feels like a leftover from a previous relationship. That is what an alternative lifestyle means to a child. So I want to point out that we're facing two competing worldviews. One worldview is that every child, and hence every adult, has identity rights and relational rights with respect to their parents. And these rights impose obligations on adults to do certain things. We don't usually like to say that part too loud because nobody wants to hear that we have obligations. The competing worldview is that every adult has the right to the sexual activity they want with a minimum of inconvenience, and children just have to accept whatever the adults choose to give them. We don't usually say that last part out loud because we'd be ashamed of ourselves if we just blurted it out like that. So, at the Ruth Institute, we've created this brochure, which I'd now like to pass out. Hadley, would you pass these out to everybody? Okay. It's called Do You Know a Survivor of the Sexual Revolution? And as Hadley's passing this out, I'm going to be talking about it in just a minute. Don't open it up just yet. It's a surprise inside. So exactly what do we mean by the sexual revolution? Let me define it for you. And by the way, if you're interested in the Ruth Institute and what we have to say, we have this sheet down here in the front of the room where you can sign up for our electronic newsletter list. So if you'd like to do that, that's available to you. So what exactly do I mean when I use the term sexual revolution? I'm talking about it like everybody knows what I'm talking about. So let me define how I'm using this terminology. I define the sexual revolution as having three main ideas. The first revolutionary idea is that a good and decent society ought to separate sex from childbearing. The second is that a good and decent society ought to separate both sex and childbearing from marriage. Now, these two ideas combined have created the hookup culture, the divorce culture, the single mother by choice culture, the Olivia Newton-John song culture that I mentioned to you, and the adultery culture that has led to millions of users of the Ashley Madison website, adultery matching service. Now, the final idea of the sexual revolution is that men and women are completely interchangeable. Any differences that we observe between men and women are socially constructed and almost certainly unjust, and we should obliterate all differences between men and women. A man can become a woman can become a man. Society's job is to endorse the individual's self-understanding and enforce that self-understanding throughout the rest of society. Now, there's just one problem with this set of ideological claims. All three of them are false. Sex really does make babies. Children really do need their own parents. And marriage attaches children to their parents. And men and women really are different. So we have a situation in which the people in power in all the major developed countries of the world have come to believe that they have a moral obligation to build society around three things that are patently false. It takes a lot of force to do that. It takes a lot of propaganda to make people believe these things. After all, we receive competing evidence on a regular basis that these things are not true. And that is why I believe that the sexual revolution has become a totalitarian ideology. Not left, not right. This is beyond left and right. It's a new ideology standing all on its own. Sometimes you may feel that you're being barraged by propaganda. You may feel that you're hearing one more study that claims what, and you can't quite believe it. The fact is you are being barraged with propaganda, and we need to see that that is what it is. Few people, even the most ardent opponents of the sexual revolution, I think have really understood just how deep the problem really is. So now let's take a look at this brochure, Do You Know a Survivor of the Sexual Revolution? Do you have one, Hadley? You get to have one too, baby. Here, we've got some more. We've got some more, honey. I've got some more. Okay. So as you open it up, and look down this flap, this inside flap, what you'll see is a list that we've compiled of different groups of people who have been harmed in some way by these ideologies, taken one or singly or all together. Okay. At the very top of the list, the very first person up there is children of divorce. And as you start looking down that column and read some of the other groups of people there, reluctantly divorced persons, heartbroken career women, pornography addicts and their families, you look down there, I imagine that you will see somebody that you know. Now, I think you'll see that men and women and children alike have all been harmed by this ideology, with the possible exception of a handful of predatory alpha males who like the thing exactly as it is. Now, as you open up the brochure, on this larger panel here, you'll see a column that says, "Is this what you were told?" And at the very top, the granddaddy of all lies of the sexual revolution, kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. I want to just ask you to think about how many good and decent people broke up marriages that were perfectly okay marriages because they believed that the kids would be okay. So many people are building their lives around things that are really not true. Now, on the screen right now, I'm showing you some of the risks that are facing children of divorce. I want to just pick out that very first one, talk about children of divorce. This table here is based on literally hundreds of scholarly articles and books that have been produced over the last 40 years. And these negative outcomes, I think, derive from the basic injustice that is done to children by separating them from one of their parents without an unavoidable reason. And let me pause right here, in case there's a family law professor in here or anything like that. Let me pause right here and simply say that the innovation that no-fault divorce created was in how we treated the low-conflict marriage. If there was a high-conflict marriage where there was abuse, adultery, addiction, or abandonment, one could always get a divorce under a fault-based system. So those people, we can't say, well, we have to have divorce in order to deal with that. The old system of structured divorce actually dealt with that. Okay, the innovation is that in people who have problems that fall well short of those kinds of problems are permitted to get a divorce for any reason or no reason, and those are the children who are really the most harmed by the disruption of their parents' lives. And some people have studied this separately. You know, they've broken out the data by high conflict marriage, low conflict marriage, and so on. So I think that the reason this is happening to the kids, this is what I want to emphasize, that secure attachments between a child and each of his parents builds the foundation for the child's personality, for the development of the personality. That's what Love and Economics is about. It's about how important attachment really is. In the child's little world, mother and father are the most powerful and important people. Parents actually act as stand-ins for God himself. And from this most basic relationship, the child develops a sense of self as a social and spiritual being. Is the world a safe place for me? Do I really belong here? Am I worthy of love? Divorcing parents will tell their children, we still love you, we just don't love each other anymore. But the child's other parent is half of who they are. The child often cannot make sense of these contradictory claims because they're not really true. The parent creating the separation is telling the child, I want something else more than I want a relationship with your other parent. That is, with half of you. And in their hearts, the kids know it. Now, the table that I just had up there is based on another brochure that we've created called Children in Divorce, which is right over here. Children in divorce, I would say, were chronologically the first victims of the sexual revolution. They were followed by children of single parents, and now children of same-sex couples. We intend to create brochures for all the victims of the sexual revolution, and you can take a look at the ones we already have. Now, all these kids have at least this one thing in common. The adult's relationship with their sex partner is more important to them than their relationship with the child's other parent. Let me say that again. The adults have decided that their relationship with their sex partner is more important to them than their relationship with the child's other parent. Needless to say, in a family where the mother and father are continuously and faithfully married to one another, that conflict doesn't even arise. So it's no wonder that the kids have all these pathologies and difficulties. They can't make sense of what is being told to them. And before I leave this part of the talk, I want to mention one more category of the victims of the sexual revolution, and that is donor-conceived persons. You like my little slide there with the baby barcode on its head? Sometimes people laugh at that slide. Are you guys awake out here? What's going on? Okay, all right. All right. A lot of times people who advocate in favor of donor conception create the impression that donor-conceived children are so wanted by their parents that their chosenness of the children is going to override all of the other considerations. There are many other problems that sometimes arise. The problems that often arise with living with an unrelated adult, the pain children often feel from the absence of one of their biological parents, all these things can be safely disregarded. But the children of donor conception have their own perspective. Many of them do long for their missing parent. Some feel shame about being partially purchased. Some of them have anxieties about inadvertently encountering an unknown half-sibling. I recently met a young man who has reason to believe that he has 500 half-siblings. His father was a medical student and donated sperm once a month for about 10 years. And so this young man finally moved 1,000 miles away from his hometown because he had had too many encounters with people who looked mysteriously like himself. And it just was too creepy for him to deal with. So, in my opinion, third-party reproduction arrangements are morally problematic for all the same reasons that divorce is morally problematic. For most of these children, their gamete donor is anonymous and never part of their family. One of the parents has made a decision to completely cut the other parent out of their lives. This is a greater injustice than a divorce or separation because it's deliberate, it's from the beginning, and typically it's permanent. So how many victims have there been of the sexual revolution? Well, we don't really know for sure, but here are a few things that we do know. We do know that every year since 1972, there have been about 1 million children per year who have experienced the divorce of their parents. We know that every year since 1988, over 1 million children a year have been born to unmarried parents. In the most recent year for which we have data, 1.7 million children were born to unmarried parents. Typically, this means that they will not have a relationship with their father. And it frequently means that they will be living in a household with their mother's next boyfriend, whom we know statistically to be the most dangerous person in a child's life is your mother's boyfriend, who is not related to you. By 2010, about 20 million children were living in single-parent households. I want you to know, all of you as young people, particularly I'm speaking to the young people, I will never accept this as normal. I don't care how often it happens. I don't care what any court or legislature says about it. This is not right, and I will never accept it as normal. So what can we do about it? I'm determined to do something about it, and there are a couple of things you can do about it. If you're not convinced by what I'm saying, we have lots of resources at the Ruth Institute that you can look at, and I would hope that you would at least consider what I'm saying, because some of these things may happen to you, and you may be looking for an alternative way of thinking about what is going on in your life. So I would encourage you to keep an open mind about these matters, even if you're not entirely convinced today. What I would encourage all of you to do, though, is if you are a victim or survivor in some way of the sexual revolution, that you can tell your story so that people hear that there's some downside to the sexual revolution. It's not all glory, glamour, and fun and freedom, that there's a downside to it. So at the Ruth Institute, we have a special site that we call kidsdivorcestories.org. We have another site that we call Tell Ruth the Truth, which people write in all kinds of different things that have happened to them that they want to share with others. And the kids' divorce stories I would particularly commend to you to take a look at. If that applies to you, feel free to come and tell your story. It's all anonymous. You don't have to, reveal your identity or anything like that. But I would invite you to take a look at it. If you know somebody who's considering divorce, I would just put this thought in your mind. Many of the people who write on that site are in their 50s and 60s, and it still hurts. That's what I think people need to know that. And I feel sure that if parents realized that it was going to bother their kids 30 years later, they might work harder at their marriage. They might be more careful about who they picked out to marry in the first place. Okay? So I encourage you, I commend those resources to you. Then the second thing you can do is that if you have had some measure of healing yourself or have some way in which you're on board with what we're saying, that you can try to reach out to others. And at this time, I'd like to just kind of point out to you one use of this brochure that we developed, and this is part of why we developed it. In your mind right now, think about one person that you think fits into one of these categories who has been harmed in some way. And it can be yourself if you want to, but just pick out one person, have one person in your mind, and think about what they did, said, what's happening to them now, what they did earlier, what happened to them earlier, and so on. And think about them, and think about where do they fit in on this survivor chart. So I'm just making up a person now. I'm going to say, this is a person I know who was a child of divorce. Her parents divorced at an early age, and she had a lot of trauma over that, and that she's also what we call a refugee from the hookup culture. That is, she was involved with a lot of sexual activity, and she regrets that now. She was hurt by it and can't quite figure out what to do or how to help herself and so on. But this is the person that I have in my heart right now, thinking about that person in that situation. So, okay, my friend fits in here. What was she thinking? What was she told? What were her parents told? Okay, so at the beginning there, at the very top of our thing, their parents were told, and probably she was told, kids are resilient. The kids are fine as long as the parents are happy. Children don't need to live with both of their parents. Children have no problem with their parents' new love interests. A lot of times for children of divorce, that kind of talk is crazy-making for them because it is bothering them. And they're told the problem is with them. We'll take you to therapy. We'll put you on Ritalin. Whatever like that, see? Okay? So maybe this is part of her experience, and so you can put yourself into her into her position to see this is what she was thinking. Then the refugees from the hookup culture, you can see there that people are told certain things about casual sex. People are told casual sex is harmless as long as you use a condom every time. No one ever feels used, confused, or disappointed from hooking up. No one ever feels jealous or hurt when their sex partners have sex with others. Okay? These things aren't true, right? But this is what we were told. This is why we embarked on these behaviors, okay? So put that into your heart as you're thinking about your friend. Now, I put this picture up here. Is anybody here from Central California by any chance? No one. Okay, last week I was in California and a half dozen people put their hand up. This is called the Thule fog. Dr. Morse, why are you putting a picture of fog on this screen here? Thule fog is something that takes place in Fresno in the Central Valley, California, and it is so dense you can't see to the end of your headlight, okay? You see that where the arrow was pointed? That's the center line of the highway. You see where that other arrow is pointed? That's the berm. Okay, you cannot see squat. About 10 years ago, I was driving from San Diego up to the Central Valley with my daughter for Irish dance competition. My son was in the car with me, and we had two foster kids. We get off the freeway, and this Thule fog comes over us. And I mean, I'm plodding along like this, and my son says, "Mom, you're on the wrong side of the road." And I was, because there's a headlight like coming right at us. So now, why did I put this up here? Because we have 12 survivors of the sexual revolution. Every one of them has told 3 or 4 lies repeatedly throughout the culture. This stuff is being fed to us. I think there are a lot of people driving down the wrong side of the road in a fog. And when you're driving down the wrong side of the road in a fog, bad things happen. This is an actual crash that took place up there in 2001. So we need to be gentle with one another when we're encountering people who are having these kinds of problems. It may not be all their fault what took place, and they may need our help and support. So we can inform ourselves about some of this. This is the chart that is in our Children of Divorce brochure, and you can see that it's very typical. It's very typical. It's not unusual for children of divorce to have persistent feelings of loneliness. It isn't unusual for children of divorce to engage in early sexual activity. So if you're thinking about your friend, my hypothetical friend here, you can know that she's not alone in what she's going through. And so as we reach out to one another in friendship, and I do recommend friendship as an important part of any social movement, of any part of social healing, friendship is an important part. I would encourage you to say these things to yourself or to others. First, By the way, I would not recommend that if you've got a friend who's hurting, that you get my brochure and blast it into their face. I would not recommend that because they're not going to receive it. You know, they don't. Right. But what I would recommend is that you listen, and try to work into the conversation these 3 points. 1, I'm sorry that happened to you. Because in your heart you can say that. I'm sorry that this happened to you. 2nd, you're not alone. You're not the only person who's had this happen to them. You know, a lot of times we think we're the only ones. We think, gosh, my family could handle this if only we were more together. Our step family would work, just like all those families on TV work out okay. Those of us back in the 70s when I was telling you about the people who are trying to do this torn between two lovers thing, I remember distinctly, you know what we all thought? We all thought if we were cooler and not so possessive and jealous and didn't have all these primitive feelings, we could make this work. It's really just us, right? Everybody has that isolated feeling around these kinds of issues. And then finally, please, in some way, if you can, tell them it was not all your fault. Now, some of it might have been. I mean, I can tell you for sure, I knew somewhere in my heart that what I was doing wasn't right. So it was kind of my fault. But then there was Olivia Newton-John blasting into my ear, too. You know what I mean? So we have to give ourselves some, what shall I say, some gentleness as we deal with this. Because there are a lot of people who are wounded. So I close by inviting you to join with the Ruth Institute in this mission and invite you to check out the resources that we have here. If you do sign up for our newsletter, I will send you a PDF copy of these PowerPoint slides so that you can refer to them later. Thank you very much. So now the procedure is we sit down and Hadley and I take questions, and all questions about Plato have to go to him.
I'd like to make a comment and then ask you a related question.
Okay.
I think the recommendations that you made at the end here might be very relevant for people who are in college, people who maybe never got into college, but I think most of the people here are law students. They have a unique ability to affect social change by using this rare and unique skill they have or will have as lawyers. I've never practiced family law. I've never even studied family law. But I brought up a lot of legal actions which have changed divorce law, domestic violence law, rape law, and many others by using legal action. So I think when you talk to law students, maybe in addition to the 2 or 3 things you listed, you might want to list half a dozen kinds of legal actions that they could use their skills about, not just once they graduate, but many of our law students have brought legal actions while still at law school and had an amazing impact. The related question then is, what legal actions are you and your institute now involved in or have been involved in over the last 2 or 3 years to show how you can use legal action, which I would contend is far more effective, efficient, effective, more cost-effective, much more effective bang for the buck than all the brochures.
Sure. Well, I certainly recognize the import of what you just said there at the end, you know. And I give talks to lots and lots of different groups, and they aren't all law students. So, and I am not a lawyer, nor have I ever been a lawyer, and so I don't, as a rule, bring legal actions. But among
Does your institute?
No, not really. We're not a legal.
You're not litigating.
No, and we're certainly not litigating.
Then I'd like to ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
Why not? You recognize, as many other people do,
Yeah.
that legal action, not just in court, but for regulatory agencies
Right.
and so on, can be far more effective, far more efficient, more bang for the buck than all the other things.
Because
why don't you have a lawyer, if not a volunteer lawyer,
Right.
and go out and litigate? Sue somebody, sue the bastards, get something done. Seriously.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll take it under advisement. Okay. I don't know what else to say about that, but yeah.
Do you have a lawsuit in mind? I mean, apart from trying to change the laws of divorce and contesting cases of wrongful birth and things like that, do you have a certain kind of action in mind that you would pursue?
Well, I give you a few that I have done. I've got 2/3 of the states now are routinely issuing orders prohibiting smoking in the home when there's a divorced child. We've got about a dozen states now prohibit smoking in the home when children are in foster care. A former student group here changed the law with regard to domestic violence in the District of Columbia, slashing domestic violence, giving women more rights. And that was a student group, students should be able to look at your list of concerns and say, well, yeah, we can approach that one by bringing this kind of action or that kind of action. One good start would be to go to a government website, I think it's called regulatory.com, which lists all of the current regulatory rules which are now pending and on which people are inviting comment. And you can do a word search. So I assume you'd be looking for words like sexual revolution or alimony or divorce or whatever else. You could find out what these are, and then you could take your expertise, and instead of giving it to casual audiences where it might not have very much impact, you can get it to the very government officials who are, number one, capable of evaluating, which with all due respect, I don't think any of us in the audience really are.
Right.
But more importantly, if they think whatever you're saying and advocating has value, they're in a position to do it. They can change the federal rules. They can bring actions and complaints concerning whatever position you are on this, just as the other side, those who favor the overall sexual revolution or whatever you want to call it, can bring their action.
Did you bring a suit on contesting the use of smoking on part of women who are pregnant for the sake of not affecting the unborn child? Is that no. So
That might be a good one.
yeah, it might be good. But what I suggest to you is that if you look at these things, you might suggest a range of things that are really more central in going to the core of the matter than affecting smoking in the household.
Well, that's okay. This is not his issue. This is not his issue.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's right. Okay.
Rather than make recommendations for law students who have these valuable skills and will go out of here having no idea really what kind of legal actions they might want to think about. And by the way, you get credit for it. We've got law students who go out and bring legal actions, then start an organization. And of course, then you get your tuition remitted after 10 years. You get yourself a job. These are things these law students could be doing right now.
Okay. So your spouse too, right? Anyway, why don't you call on people?
Yeah, I think your hand was up first. Go ahead.
Raises a controversial topic of abortion.
Uh-huh.
What is your posture towards abortion?
We're unambiguously pro-life.
The problem is in this world, how I've looked at it and looked at it from a pragmatic and practical standpoint. How do you stop abortion without making the choice to have an abortion? Is that possible? Can we stop abortion without making legally to have an abortion?
Well,
That's what the law was. We lived with it.
Well, you guys, I guess I should have anticipated this sort of question. I'm sorry, but let me say, you can make laws prohibiting abortion. You can make laws that discourage abortion in various ways. That can be done. The other thing that can be done and must be done is that abortion needs to become unthinkable. We have a whole network of pregnancy care centers that exist for helping women who are in some kind of crisis situation. So if abortion ever becomes illegal once again, those people will be there to help women deal with the situation, whatever situation they might find themselves in. So there's a whole set of things that have to be changed, in my opinion. The other thing that I think should be pointed out is that part of the reason it seems impractical to change the law is that right now the whole economy is built around contraception and abortion. Delayed childbearing is the price of entry into the professions in this culture. Now, that doesn't have to be true. That would not be that hard to change. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things that upset me the most when I realized that I was trying to do the impossible of raising a child and still have my job and all these kind of things. We have set ourselves up so that we think equality means that we enter the workforce at the same time on the same terms that men do. And what that means is that we have to delay childbearing. That's what it has to mean. And that's why people are so attached to contraception, why they're so attached to abortion. That's why it seems like it's so important. But the fact is, what we're doing is we're taking the university and we're taking the market as given, and we're demanding that women adapt their bodies to the market and to the workplace. But I say, why don't we take our bodies as given and have the university and the marketplace adapt to us? That actually is not that hard to do. In other words, there are plenty of programs that allow people to get their degrees over a period of time, or that allow you to leave the workforce and come and go in the workforce, and so on and so forth. The professions that are most heavily weighted toward early investment happen to be the most influential professions, right along the lines of what you're saying. Law and academia are about the most structured labor markets that I can think of. In other words, if you don't get tenure, you're shot. If you don't make partner, you're shot. And all that investment takes place right at the peak moment of a woman's fertility. And why? Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why can't we restructure either higher education or the labor market to accommodate us, rather than us being told by Apple and Google and Facebook that we have to freeze our eggs so that we can work for them on their terms, and when we're 55, we can have our first baby? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. So that's the larger. You're coming at it from a policy perspective, and I respect that. I do respect that. But I think it's important to lay out this conceptual dilemma that we have found ourselves into, so that we can think our way out of those things.
I'm sorry, but I took your position.
Go ahead.
I took your position to be that with abortion, it's not really your body, but another body that's involved.
That's right.
And your position then is also associated with the fact that at no point is an offspring in the womb been anything less than human at any moment, that our laws on homicide do not usually depend on the height or weight of the victim. And so the question is why, if that is a human being from its first moments and utterly innocent, why it wouldn't be covered by the same laws that govern homicide everywhere else. At least that seems to be the old understanding. I recall that line, the old joke of Red Skelton's, a joke that's fled from the culture, where he said, they had a military wedding. Well, I think they had a military wedding. Let's put it this way. There were guns there. That's a joke from a culture that's fled from the assumption that even people in Dogpatch, USA, realized they didn't have the right to throw this thing away at the time. But anyway, I think what I understood, because I thought your position on abortion really hinged on all those premises.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the thing that you said, but I think it's important that people understand why it is that some women get so attached to the idea that we must have delayed childbearing, and that right. Our lives as we understand them are built around that.
Right.
And the people who dominate the professions are childless women, or women who've had one child at the age of 35 or 40. Right. That's who's dominating the political culture. And so I think I want to challenge that, in addition to everything else that you just said.
So you have a good angle on it. But anyway, if somebody has other questions.
Yes. Yes.
In terms of what you're passionate about the topic and what you've seen in terms of, anywhere where the practices around that are more ideal, or have you had some sort of, vision of what it would look like in solving that?
Oh, I think there are some university departments that are better than others. That's certainly true. But the profession as a whole is set up in a particular way. And when I said at the beginning of my comment, these are the most highly structured labor markets in the whole of the labor market. Normal people go get jobs and they quit their, they quit their job and then they go back to get a different job. And people do all kinds of things throughout most of the market. But we're accustomed to thinking in terms of the people who are most deeply involved in policy making happen to be lawyers and professors, and we have this very rigid view of the labor market. I think it is very helpful to realize that that's numerically not typical at all. It's typical of our social class, but it's not. It's certainly not necessary. I mean, I'll just give you an example. If anybody who knows this name, probably some of you will break out in hives when I mention this name. But Phyllis Schlafly is somebody that I happen to respect quite a lot. Phyllis Schlafly is a well-known conservative icon. She's 90 years old now, literally 90 years old. And she had 6 children, and she went and got a law degree in her when she was like 45 or something like that. And she didn't become Phyllis Schlafly until she was 50. You know what I mean? I mean, she was a housewife from St. Louis for most of her life, And so and what did she do? She created that for herself. And a market that has some unregulated space can allow people to create themselves in those kind of ways. So Yes, sir. Yes, you.
Marcus Asher's another good example.
Yes.
Had a family first and had a pretty good career after that. As an economist,
Who?
you probably appreciate that one of the things we're against, those of us who believe in the great truths and the urgency of what you're saying, are up against is the money involved in the lies, the pornography industry, the fashion industry, television, movies. I mean, ads. You can't get away from the lies, and they drum it into you. How do we combat that? The billions that go into the lies.
Well, maybe we should have a class action suit.
Well, I did it with regard to smoking. We got anti-smoking messages on the air. We dropped cigarette consumption. We changed the entire view of America with regard to smoking. It used to be socially and sexually sophisticated. Now you're a pariah. And what more powerful industries were there than TV and the broadcasting industry? It's a 3-page letter that I wrote before I even started practicing law.
I don't have a good answer to your question, but I think it's important. It's important to, and that came to my mind just because of you. So thank you very much.
But it be reflected in the old that new joke of a guy walks into the drugstore and says, "Joe, give me a pack of condoms and a pack of cigarettes." We understand what is respectable to ask for these days. But over here, and then Josh.
But I do want to just emphasize, though, the amount of money that is on one side of this equation. I can tell you, as somebody running a little institute, my opponents, the presidents of other institutes make more than my annual budget. I mean, it's just an amazing amount of money is flowing in on the side of sexual license, and I can't think of any donors of any that are anywhere close to the people on the other side on these issues. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
It's kind of interesting to me. I always think that the people that are most strongly in favor of what they call reproductive rights and what we talked about today are those on the left. And yet so much of this, and yet they flip when it comes to economics, and so much of this is bought and paid for an inexorable sort of result of market forces. And if these ideas are, and these pressures on women and these sorts of things that are dehumanizing are in a large part of our modern capitalist society running roughshod over individual rights. So I think that's kind of an irony of the perfection.
Yes, I want to speak to that too, because I agree with that. When I first started thinking about these issues, I thought it was a left-right thing. I don't think it's a left-right thing. I think on these issues, there's only one party, and it's the party of, I don't know how you want to describe it. It's the Revolutionary Party. There's only one party on these issues. The Republican Party is hopeless. I mean, the Republican Party is where people go when they believe in these things. But if you look at what we've been able to do or not do, even when we have the power, many of the people with money inside the Republican Party are every bit as big a problem as people in the Democratic Party. So I think it's a big problem. And part of it has to do with capitalism. I think you're right about that. Part of it has to do with capitalism, but I don't think that's the whole thing. I mean, I think it's deeper, and it's very deep. When you think about it, I was a labor economist. I was trained in labor economics. So one of the people we were taught to revere was Gary Becker, and Gary Becker had this whole theory of the family. And the theory of the family was that people would use rational economic calculation to decide the size of their family and whether to marry and who to marry and all that kind of stuff. And so he had this theory that people had a desire for child services, and so they would invest in children sort of like a consumer durable, and kind of like a refrigerator or a car, something like that. That is how you could understand and model why people would have children. But everybody's kind of chuckling about that. But when you think about that, that's a completely inadequate theory. However, if you ask the reverse question, do we have a theory about why a child wants their own parents? And we have absolutely nothing to say. The modern world, the whole of the modern world, has no idea why a child would want their own parents, why adopted kids want to go find their parents, or why these donor-conceived kids are so upset. We have no idea why they care. And so that's why we're writing that all out of the law, because we can't explain it. And I think within modern philosophy, modern political philosophy, we don't have the resources in there to answer these questions at the level and the depth they need to be answered. Yeah, there was a couple
Josh
hands.
And then Mr. Cook, and then we have, here we have.
Okay.
So let's take these three to wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah, just real quickly, it seems like a lot of this applies to people who are married, like commit to the husband and wife, and mother and father, raise sort of marriage, raise childbearing, things like that. How do you recommend single people get involved in sort of pushing these ideas?
Any way you want. I mean, in other words, I mean, are you talking about somebody who's committed to being single or somebody who happens to be single? I think there are plenty of ways that you can be involved. You can be involved with us through our website and all those types of things that I talked about. But I think the way in which single people go about seeking a partner, the way single people conduct themselves in their dating and courtship and those kind of things, it's extremely important. And we don't have much in the way of real resources for people doing that in a sensible way. So anything you can bring to the table in terms of good ways for people to meet one another, behave themselves while they're together, those type of things, supporting one another and those type of things, I think that's the sort of thing that I would say, if I understand correctly about what you're asking. Yeah, let's take this young lady here.
So I was wondering how you and your institute address the fact that not all birth parents, married or otherwise well married, are good parents. So, for example, you can have a married couple that has a child and chooses to stay together and still abuses the child or doesn't have the financial means to take care of the child. So, could we really argue that it would be better for the child to be with their birth parents who are either abusive or don't care for the child or don't want to have the child than stay with a loving, happily committed gay couple who want their entire life to have a child, but isn't their actual birth parent?
Okay, so the problem here really has to do with those birth parents, right? So we have in place structures that are more or less, well, I don't want to go too far into that. We do have legal structures for addressing the situation when the child is at risk from their own parents. Okay, we have child protective services in every state. We have that, and so we have, but all of those are predicated on the idea of trying to reunify the family if possible. So I have experience as a foster parent, so I know some of the kids do need some care, and sometimes they need care temporarily, sometimes they need it permanently. But I will tell you as a foster mom, the one thing I learned from those kids, they always want their own parents. It's quite amazing how much they want their own parents. They would rather live in the back of the van with their own mom and dad than to live with me and my husband in our nice house. So what I think children really want is they want their parents to get it together and be appropriate parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be better, would you argue, though, that it's better off for this child than, say, raised by parents who know they don't want them, and then go in and out of foster care where they're taken away from their child, and maybe their parents then go through a counseling program or something, and then go back and repeat this process over and over and over again, or just be taken from birth, or like right after being born and being adopted into a family that's going to love them onward? I mean, it's a gay couple adopt a child who's been in it.
Look, set the gay part aside because that's a secondary issue at this point, right?
What's your point? I mean, we'll say a single parent or a grandparent.
No, right. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. I could regale you with many of these kind of stories because I've been up close and personal with these, and we had one very heartbreaking case where I would have preferred that the child never went back to the parent, but the foster parents don't have very many rights. I will just tell you that. But the point is, who decides? Is the state going to swoop in and say these parents aren't adequate? We're going to swoosh the kid away? And the answer is you have to have a lot of procedural safeguards before you do a thing like that, right? And also I think that people. So I mean, there's no truly good answer to your question because it's a situation where you have to kind of play it by ear each and every time. Every case is a little bit different. But to change the goal is that every child be cared for by their own parents. And part of what supports that goal is people thinking about that before they have sex. You ask yourself, before I have sex, would it be a disaster for me to have a child with this person? What if my IUD fails, which is what happened to me? What if the pill fails, which is what happened to Maggie Gallagher? I don't feel bad saying that because Maggie's talked about it in public. Okay, so would it be a disaster if I got pregnant in this situation? And if the answer is yes, then we really should be not having sex with that person. And so back on that one slide where I whispered to you that the kid, we have obligations, right? That's one of the obligations, right, is to think through the possibility that this act, even if it's safely contracepted, even if you think it's safe, it may not. And then what will you do, okay? And so that's all part of the equation, I think. Yes, ma'am.
I comment, sort of dovetailing off this question and answer. There has been a recent study, nationally done, very largely, I don't know if you've heard of it, by Mark
Regner's, yeah.
I think you cite parts of his research in one of your brochures, where he does look at, overall, yes, individual on the case-by-case basis, some situations will be better than others, but overall, what do, children of, say, parents who have had a same-sex partner or have had same-sex relationships of any sort, how do they fare? What are the reported outcomes? And he did this very largely. There are a lot of smaller studies that were started by the other side of the issue that had come out before this very large study, a very scientifically rigorously done study that shows that children who have had one or more parents who have had a romantic relationship with somebody of the same gender have poor outcomes on, I would say, like 3-something outcomes of, in GPA, dropping out of school.
Okay, that study, that's a very important study, and one of the reasons it's important is because it compares outcomes of continuously married parents, divorced parents, this particular definition of same-sex parents, and a number of other outcomes. That study shows without any doubt that kids do the best with their mom and dad. But what I want to say about it is that my argument does not hinge just on the outcomes for children of these measurable things. I think it's important that we think in terms of justice for the child. What is owed to the child? And if something is owed to the child, then the question is, what does that impose on us as adults? And for all of you young people, what I want you to just kind of think about is, do you identify with the child or do you identify with the adult? And I think some of us as adults need to identify with those kids because they can't protect themselves. They can't defend themselves. Okay? And the situation that you're bringing up is important, but to redo all of law around the assumption that parents are going to be abusive to their kids, you have to have a provision for exceptional situations. But at the same time, you have to hold up and be clear with people that what is justice for the child is a connection with their own parents, with their own personal identity.
Let's Mr. Cook take the last question.
Don't we need to stop here eventually?
Let's reserve a minute for some announcements we have to make.
Okay.
Mr. Cook, why don't you?
Yeah, just on the consequences you talked about with children, one thing I was interested in is, do you have any data or thoughts on whether those consequences are mostly or mixed of psychological or biological? In other words, if you had like a donor-conceived child who never found out that that's what they were, would they have the same consequences because something biological by nature makes us yearn for our biological parents? Would they have the same consequences if they were never told that as a child that was?
Not too much study has been done of that. There have been some studies of whether you were told and when you were told and things like that. But I'm not familiar with whether there's any big dramatic results one way or the other. So, truthfully, it hasn't been studied nearly well enough. A lot of the information that I have I have a brochure over here about donor conception, and a lot of the information about the psychological things come from people's reports. I have very little on there in terms of data on people's functioning psychologically. What I do have in there, though, that has been studied are the health risks and the physical risks simply associated with the procedures. So there are risks associated with IVF. There are risks associated with the ICSI procedure, which is, I forget what ICSI stands for, but it's the treatment for male infertility where they'll take one sperm, they'll find one live one and, kind of really give it a big boost, and, so that sperm that's not a good swimmer or whatever the problem is, it gets in there and they conceive that child with that one sperm. Those kids have a lot of issues. It's very interesting to see that. And the IVF kids have a lot of issues. And a lot of them have to do with preterm birth and have to do with low birth weight and things like that. So low birth weight and preterm birth are risk factors for a whole bunch of other things.